Take that dress off. Now, the command didn't come with the heat of desire Sienna expected, but with a cold, trembling dread. Sienna stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror of their penthouse suite, the blood-red silk pooling around her feet. She had thought the anonymous gift was Lucian's way of reclaiming her, but as she turned to face her husband, the ruthless don of the city, she saw the one emotion she had never witnessed in him: fear. Lucian slammed the heavy oak door, locking it and pressing his back against the wood. His eyes weren't on her curves, they were fixated on the unique, intricate stitching of the bodice. "You think that's a gift?" he whispered, the silence of the room amplifying his panic. "That's a death warrant. The architect knows you're here." In that moment, the air shifted. The scent of expensive cologne and anticipation was replaced by the metallic taste of adrenaline. Sienna's mask of the innocent trophy wife slipped, her posture sharpening instinctively. She realized the dress wasn't the problem, the target on her back was. The evening air in the penthouse was thick with the scent of expensive jasmine and the hushed, electric hum of a city that never slept. Sienna stood in the center of the master suite, her skin still damp and warm from a bath that had lasted far too long. The room was a monument to Lucian's success: Italian marble, silk-paneled walls, and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the skyline. Yet, for all its luxury, the suite often felt like a beautifully constructed cage. Her life for the past 3 years had been a series of curated moments: the right charities, the right jewels, the right silence. She was the elegant wife of the city's most formidable don, a woman whose past was a closed book, its pages glued shut with the blood of her enemies. She turned her attention to the vanity, where a midnight black box sat waiting. It had arrived earlier that afternoon, delivered by a courier who had vanished into the shadows before the security detail could even run his plates. There was no card, no signature, and no return address, just a ribbon the color of dried blood. Sienna had felt a strange, cold prickle at the base of her neck when she first saw it, but she had dismissed it as nerves. Her marriage to Lucian had grown increasingly strained. He was a man of shadows and secrets, and lately the shadows had been winning. She hoped this was a gesture of reconciliation, a sign that he finally saw her not just as a trophy to be protected, but as a partner to be cherished. As she untied the ribbon, the paper fell away with a whisper, revealing the most breathtaking garment she had ever seen. The dress was a deep, vibrant crimson, the silk so fine it felt like a liquid between her fingers. It glowed with an almost predatory radiance under the amber light of the chandelier. The design was daring: a plunging neckline, a back that dipped to the base of her spine, and a skirt that seemed designed to flow like spilled wine across a marble floor. It was a masterpiece of high-fashion construction, but there was something else about it, a weight, a gravity that felt intentional. Sienna stepped into the gown, the fabric cool and heavy against her athletic frame. She was slim, but the muscle beneath her skin was the result of a different kind of life, one she had tried desperately to forget. She smoothed the silk over her hips, marveling at how perfectly it fit. It was as if the tailor knew her measurements better than she knew them herself. She spent an hour on her hair, letting the long, dark waves cascade over her shoulders, and applied her makeup with a precision that bordered on ritualistic. She wore a diamond necklace that Lucian had given her for their first anniversary, the stones catching the light and throwing sharp, cold sparks. Standing before the mirror, Sienna didn't recognize the woman looking back. For years she had played the role of the poised, quiet wife, her dark eyes reflecting only what people expected to see: intelligence, devotion, and a hint of well-bred vulnerability. But in this dress, the innocent facade was cracking. The red silk seemed to call to something buried deep inside her, something fierce and uncompromising. She looked like a queen prepared for war, or a sacrifice prepared for the altar. She didn't know yet that the elegance of the cut was a lure, or that the specific shade of red had been chosen to match the color of a target. She stood there, waiting for the sound of Lucian's footsteps, unaware that the ghost she had been running from had finally caught up to her. The heavy oak doors to the master suite creaked open, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Lucian entered, his tall, imposing frame casting a long shadow across the marble floor. He was a man built of hard angles and dark intentions, his black suit tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. Usually when he saw her, there was a flicker of heat in his dark, midnight eyes, a possessive, simmering fire that reminded her why she had chosen this life. But tonight, as his gaze landed on her, the fire was extinguished by a sudden, chilling frost. "Take that dress off, now." The command was a low, guttural rasp, devoid of the desire Sienna had anticipated. Instead, it carried a weight of trembling dread that made the air feel thin. Sienna froze, her hand halfway to the clasp of her necklace. Lucian, I thought you sent this. I thought this was for tonight's gala. Lucian didn't answer immediately. He slammed the door shut, locking it with a sharp, mechanical asterisk click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. He leaned his back against the wood, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. His dark, slightly curly hair was disheveled, and his piercing gaze was fixed with terrifying intensity on the bodice of the gown. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the intricate, jagged stitching that ran along the seam of the silk, a subtle, interlocking pattern that looked like the scales of a serpent. You think that's a gift? He whispered, his voice cracking with a panic she had never witnessed in him. That is the viper's stitch, Sienna. It's a signature, a calling card. He moved toward her, his footsteps heavy and uncoordinated, his hand reaching out as if to touch the fabric before recoiling in horror. The architect knows you're here. He knows exactly which floor, which room, and which woman is hiding behind my name. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The scent of her expensive jasmine perfume was suddenly suffocating, replaced by the phantom smell of cordite and old blood. Sienna's mask of the innocent trophy wife didn't just slip, it disintegrated. Her shoulders set, her chin lifted, and her expressive dark eyes lost their softness, hardening into the cold, calculating flint of a professional. The beautiful danger Lucian had always sensed in her, but never quite understood, was finally surfacing. The architect, she repeated, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. She looked down at the red silk, the dress she had thought was a romantic gesture. Now she saw it for what it was, a shroud. The viper's stitch was the mark of the man who had raised her, the man who had turned a scared orphan into the most efficient ghost in Europe. He hadn't sent the dress to kill her. He had sent it to mark her as his property, a message to Lucian that no matter how many diamonds he draped her in, she would always belong to the man who built her. He's in the city, Lucian said, his hand going to the weapon tucked into his waistband. Dante reported a breach at the perimeter of the docks an hour ago, but we thought it was a rival family. We were wrong. He's not here for my business, Sienna. He's here for his masterpiece. Sienna didn't waste time on fear. She reached behind her neck, her fingers finding the zipper of the dress. The romantic evening was dead, and the woman she had pretended to be was buried along with it. She realized the dress wasn't the problem. The fact that she had tried to hide her darkness from a man who lived in the shadows was. Lock the secondary doors, Lucian, she said, her voice now a sharp, tactical command. If he sent the dress, he's already inside the house. The silence that followed Sienna's command was heavier than the air before a summer storm. Lucian stared at her, his hand frozen on the grip of his pistol. For 3 years he had seen her as his sanctuary, the one piece of his life that wasn't stained by the soot of the underworld. Now, seeing the predatory stillness in her posture and the cold, tactical light in her eyes, he felt like he was looking at a beautiful stranger. The house is a fortress, Sienna, Lucian said, his voice regaining some of its gravelly authority, though his eyes remained wide. I have 40 men between the lobby and this floor. Dante is in the security hub. No one gets past the biometric gates without me knowing. The architect doesn't get past gates, Lucian. He dissolves them, Sienna replied, her voice devoid of the melodic softness she usually reserved for him. She began to move around the room, her gait different now, no longer the swaying grace of a socialite, but the efficient toe-to-heel prowl of a hunter. She reached into the back of her closet, pulling out a hidden floorboard that Lucian hadn't known existed. If you saw that stitching on the dress, it means he's already bypassed your external layers. He likes to watch the panic set in before the strike. It's part of the art. She pulled a compact, matte black handgun from the floorboard, checked the chamber with a practiced flick of her wrist, and tucked it into the small of her back, hidden by the folds of the crimson silk. Lucian's jaw tightened. The sight of his wife handling a firearm with the casual familiarity of a veteran sent a jolt of cognitive dissonance through him. We're leaving. Now. There's a private elevator behind the library wall. It bypasses the main shafts and leads directly to the armored garage. He grabbed her hand, his palm was slick with sweat, and pulled her toward the double doors. He keyed a code into the wall panel, and the heavy oak doors hissed open. The hallway beyond was bathed in the soft, golden glow of recessed lighting, the walls lined with Renaissance-era paintings that Lucian had collected to prove he was a man of culture. Usually the hallway felt like a gallery. Tonight it felt like a throat closing in. They reached the library, a room filled with the scent of old paper and leather. Lucian moved to a specific shelf of first editions, pressing a hidden trigger. A section of the wall groaned and slid back, revealing a small, starkly lit elevator car. "Get in," he commanded. Sienna stepped inside, her senses screaming. She watched the floor indicator as Lucien pressed the button for the subbasement. The car didn't move. Instead, a low, electronic whine filled the small space, followed by a harsh metallic asterisk clunk that vibrated through the soles of her feet. The lights in the elevator flickered, shifted to a jagged emergency red, and then died completely. "The power grid is independent," Lucien hissed, slamming his fist against the control panel. "This shouldn't be possible." "He didn't cut the power," Sienna said, her voice eerily calm in the darkness. "He looped the security software. The system thinks there's a fire in the shaft, so it's engaged the emergency brakes. We're boxed in." Lucien pulled his radio from his belt. Dante, come in. The private lift is dead. I need a status report on the perimeter. Dante." Static was the only reply, a dry, white hiss that sounded like a serpent's warning. "The elevators are cut, the comms are jammed, and we're trapped on the 42nd floor," Sienna whispered. She looked at Lucien, the red emergency light casting deep, demonic shadows across her face. "He's isolated us. He's peeling back your defenses like layers of skin, Lucien. He wants you to feel small. He wants me to feel like I'm back in the cage." Lucien looked at her, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. He wasn't just the don of a crime family anymore. He was a man trapped in a high-tech tomb with a woman he realized he didn't truly know. "You're not confused," Lucien noted, his voice a mix of awe and suspicion. "You're not even scared, you're assessing." Sienna stepped out of the stalled elevator, back into the library. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Far below, the city lights sparkled, indifferent to the life-and-death drama unfolding above. She saw a flicker of movement, a series of black shapes descending from the roof on rappelling lines, silhouetted against the moon. "I've spent 3 years pretending I didn't know how to survive this," she said, her back to him. "But the architect doesn't allow his masterpieces to retire. He thinks he owns the red on this dress. He thinks he owns the blood in my veins." She turned back to Lucien, and for a second the innocent Sienna flickered in her eyes, the woman who loved him, the woman who wanted a life of peace. Then it vanished, replaced by a cold, sharpened steel. "You have a choice, Lucien. You can keep wondering who I am, or you can help me kill the men who are coming through those windows. But you have to decide now. Because in 30 seconds the glass is going to shatter, and the wife you married will be gone." Lucien looked at the windows, then back at his wife. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he tucked a stray dark lock of hair behind her ear. He saw the viper's stitch on her shoulder, a mark of her past, but he also saw the woman who had stood by him when no one else would. "I don't care who you were," he said, his voice hardening into the steel of a don. "Just make sure we're the ones standing when the sun comes up." The first muffled asterisk thump hit the glass. The siege had begun. The silence that followed Sienna's command was heavier than the air before a summer storm. Lucien stared at her, his hand frozen on the grip of his pistol. For 3 years he had seen her as his sanctuary, the one piece of his life that wasn't stained by the soot of the underworld. Now, seeing the predatory stillness in her posture and the cold, tactical light in her eyes, he felt like he was looking at a beautiful stranger. "The house is a fortress, Sienna," Lucien said, his voice regaining some of its gravelly authority, though his eyes remained wide. "I have 40 men between the lobby and this floor. Dante is in the security hub. No one gets past the biometric gates without me knowing." "The architect doesn't get past gates, Lucien. He dissolves them," Sienna replied, her voice devoid of the melodic softness she usually reserved for him. She began to move around the room, her gait different now, no longer the swaying grace of a socialite, but the efficient toe-to-heel prowl of a hunter. She reached into the back of her closet, pulling out a hidden floorboard that Lucien hadn't known existed. "If you saw that stitching on the dress, it means he's already bypassed your external layers. He likes to watch the panic set in before the strike. It's part of the art." She pulled a compact, matte black handgun from the floorboard, checked the chamber with a practiced flick of her wrist, and tucked it into the small of her back, hidden by the folds of the crimson silk. Lucien's jaw tightened. The sight of his wife handling a firearm with the casual familiarity of a veteran sent a jolt of cognitive dissonance through him. "We're leaving. Now. There's a private elevator behind the library wall. It bypasses the main shafts and leads directly to the armored garage." He grabbed her hand, his palm was slick with sweat, and pulled her toward the double doors. He keyed a code into the wall panel, and the heavy oak doors hissed open. The hallway beyond was bathed in the soft, golden glow of recessed lighting, the walls lined with Renaissance-era paintings that Lucien had collected to prove he was a man of culture. Usually the hallway felt like a gallery. Tonight it felt like a throat closing in. They reached the library, a room filled with the scent of old paper and leather. Lucien moved to a specific shelf of first editions, pressing a hidden trigger. A section of the wall groaned and slid back, revealing a small, starkly lit elevator car. "Get in," he commanded. Sienna stepped inside, her senses screaming. She watched the floor indicator as Lucien pressed the button for the subbasement. The car didn't move. Instead, a low, electronic whine filled the small space, followed by a harsh metallic asterisk clunk that vibrated through the soles of her feet. The lights in the elevator flickered, shifted to a jagged emergency red, and then died completely. "The power grid is independent," Lucien hissed, slamming his fist against the control panel. "This shouldn't be possible." "He didn't cut the power," Sienna said, her voice eerily calm in the darkness. "He looped the security software. The system thinks there's a fire in the shaft, so it's engaged the emergency brakes. We're boxed in." Lucien pulled his radio from his belt. Dante, come in. The private lift is dead. I need a status report on the perimeter. Dante." Static was the only reply, a dry, white hiss that sounded like a serpent's warning. "The elevators are cut, the comms are jammed, and we're trapped on the 42nd floor, Sienna whispered. She looked at Lucien, the red emergency light casting deep, demonic shadows across her face. "He's isolated us. He's peeling back your defenses like layers of skin, Lucien. He wants you to feel small. He wants me to feel like I'm back in the cage." Lucien looked at her, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. He wasn't just the don of a crime family anymore. He was a man trapped in a high-tech tomb with a woman he realized he didn't truly know. "You're not confused," Lucien noted, his voice a mix of awe and suspicion. "You're not even scared, you're assessing." Sienna stepped out of the stalled elevator, back into the library. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Far below, the city lights sparkled, indifferent to the life-and-death drama unfolding above. She saw a flicker of movement, a series of black shapes descending from the roof on rappelling lines, silhouetted against the moon. "I've spent 3 years pretending I didn't know how to survive this," she said, her back to him. "But the architect doesn't allow his masterpieces to retire. He thinks he owns the red on this dress. He thinks he owns the blood in my veins." She turned back to Lucien, and for a second the innocent Sienna flickered in her eyes, the woman who loved him, the woman who wanted a life of peace. Then it vanished, replaced by a cold, sharpened steel. "You have a choice, Lucien. You can keep wondering who I am, or you can help me kill the men who are coming through those windows. But you have to decide now. Because in 30 seconds the glass is going to shatter, and the wife you married will be gone." Lucien looked at the windows, then back at his wife. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he tucked a stray dark lock of hair behind her ear. He saw the viper's stitch on her shoulder, a mark of her past, but he also saw the woman who had stood by him when no one else would. "I don't care who you were," he said, his voice hardening into the steel of a don. "Just make sure we're the ones standing when the sun comes up." The first muffled asterisk thump hit the glass. The siege had begun. The darkness was absolute, but for Sienna it was a familiar friend. In the training facilities of the architect's school, she had been forced to navigate obstacle courses in total sensory deprivation for days on end. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting her ears map the room. 12 sets of boots, heavy, professional, 6 coming from the north corridor, 6 from the south, the sound of safety catches being flicked to auto. "Lucien," she breathed, her voice barely a ghost of a sound. "Stay low and move toward the fireplace. There's a cast iron poker. Grab it, use it as a sensory extension. Don't fire unless you see the muzzle flash of their weapons." "I can't see a damn thing, Sienna," Lucien hissed back, his voice tight with the frustration of a man losing control of his own domain. "I can," she replied. The first mercenary rounded the doorframe. He was wearing GPNVG-18 panoramic night vision goggles, 4 glowing green tubes that made him look like a deep-sea predator. To him, the room was a neon green landscape of heat and shadows. He saw Lucien's heat signature crouching by the desk and raised his weapon. He never pulled the trigger. Sienna moved through the dark like a predator made of smoke. She didn't use her gun, muzzle flashes would give away her position. Instead, she used a tactical knife she had snatched from the belt of one of the fallen men in the previous room. She appeared at the mercenary's side, her movements silent on the plush carpet. With a terrifyingly efficient upward thrust, she drove the blade under the edge of his helmet, severing the brainstem. He slumped. She caught his body before it could hit the floor, using it as a muffled weight to slide into the shadows. "Contact, west wall," a voice barked from the hallway. A flare hissed through the air, ignited by one of the attackers. The library was suddenly bathed in a violent, flickering magnesium light that cast long, dancing shadows. The light revealed a scene of carnage. Sienna was no longer the woman Lucien had shared dinner with. She stood in the center of the room, her red dress torn to the thigh, her skin splattered with the blood of the man she had just killed. In the harsh white light, her eyes were wide and predatory, reflecting the flare with a cold, metallic glint. "Sienna, move," Lucien roared. 3 mercenaries opened fire. The magnesium flare made the smoke from their barrels look like clouds of ghost fire. Sienna didn't dive for cover, she moved toward them. She used a low-profile zigzag, a broken rhythm run designed to defeat the tracking speed of an armed shooter. She reached the first man, grabbed the barrel of his rifle and used it as a lever to snap his wrist. As he cried out, she spun him around, her fingers finding the pressure points in his neck. She didn't just fight, she dismantled. It was a dance of lethal precision, a blur of crimson silk and silver steel. Lucien watched, paralyzed for a split second by the sheer brutality of it. He had seen men killed, he had ordered hits, but he had never seen anyone move like this. There was no hesitation, no wasted energy. Every strike was designed to end a life in the most efficient way possible. The last mercenary in the first wave panicked. He dropped his rifle and pulled a combat knife, lunging at Sienna. She caught his wrist, twisted it until the bone audibly popped, and took his knife from his failing grip. In one fluid motion, she spun and launched the blade across the room. The knife buried itself in the throat of a mercenary who had been creeping up behind Lucien. The man fell at Lucien's feet, gurgling. Lucien looked down at the dying man, then up at his wife. The mask hadn't just fallen, it had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Is that all of them?" Lucien asked, his voice shaking. Sienna stood over a pile of bodies, her chest heaving slightly, the red dress now dark with wet stains. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw the 096 the architect had spoken of. The warmth, the love, the soft wife who liked jasmine perfume, she was buried under layers of cold, hard calculation. "No," Sienna said, her voice flat. "That was just the breach team. The architect is sending the cleaners next, and Dante is with them." She walked over to Lucien and held out a hand to help him up. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, a heartbeat where he saw her as a monster, before taking it. Her grip was like iron. "You saved my life," Lucien said, his voice a whisper. "I saved the only thing I have left," she replied, but she didn't meet his eyes. "We need to get to the panic room. Not to hide, but to see. I need the internal cameras. I need to see where Dante is hiding." As they moved toward the concealed door behind the library's wet bar, a heavy, rhythmic thudding began to vibrate through the floor. It was the sound of a battering ram hitting the reinforced doors of the penthouse. "They're through the lobby," Lucien noted, his face hardening. "My men are gone." "Then it's just us," Sienna said, locking the panic room door behind them. "And I think it's time we stopped playing by your rules, Lucien. We're in my world now." Inside the panic room, dozens of monitors flickered to life, showing every corner of the penthouse. On the central screen, they saw a man standing in the middle of the wreckage of the living room. He was dressed in a pristine grey suit, holding a tablet and looking directly into a security camera. It was Dante. He looked bored. "Lucien, my friend," Dante's voice came through the room's speakers. "I hope you enjoyed the dress. It's a shame to ruin such a nice piece of silk, but the architect insisted on a grand entrance. Open the door, and perhaps I can convince him to let you live as a servant in the new house." Lucien leaned over the console, his knuckles white. "I'm going to kill you, Dante. I'm going to peel the skin from your—" Sienna put a hand on his shoulder, silencing him. She leaned into the microphone. "Dante," she said softly. On the screen, Dante froze. He leaned closer to the camera, a smirk spreading across his face. "Ah, the prodigal daughter. I wondered when you'd find your voice. Tell me, does the Don know about the Belgrade incident, or the bodies you left in Paris?" Sienna didn't flinch. "He knows everything he needs to know. But you made a mistake, Dante. You think you're working with the architect, but the architect doesn't have partners. He has tools, and you're about to be discarded. She hit a series of keys on the console, her fingers moving with a speed that suggested she had hacked systems like this 100 times before. What are you doing? Lucien asked. I'm opening the vents, Sienna said, her eyes fixed on the screen. And I'm turning off the fire suppression system. If he wants to burn my life down, I'm going to give him the fire. The panic room was a masterpiece of cold, sterile engineering, but inside the air was thick with the suffocating heat of betrayal. Lucien stood paralyzed for a moment, his eyes darting between the monitors and the woman standing before them. The screens showed the penthouse, his sanctuary, his throne, being methodically picked apart by men who moved like ghosts. The Belgrade incident, Lucien's voice was low, vibrating with a dangerous edge. He wasn't looking at the screens anymore, he was looking at the side of Sienna's face. The body's in Paris. You told me you were the daughter of a diplomat, Sienna. You told me you ran away from an arranged marriage in Marseille. Sienna didn't look up from the console. Her fingers were a blur, bypassing the secondary firewall Dante had tried to erect. I did run away, Lucien, but not from a husband. I ran from a laboratory of killers. Everything I told you about my feelings for you was true. Everything I told you about my past was a necessity. If I had told you the truth 3 years ago, you would have either killed me as a threat or used me as a weapon. I wanted to be a wife. And now, Lucien stepped closer, his shadow falling over the glowing keys. What are you now? Now, she said, finally meeting his gaze with eyes that were hollow and terrifyingly sharp. I am the consequence of their mistake. On the main monitor, Dante was moving. He had grown impatient with the silence. He signaled to a pair of mercenaries carrying a specialized breaching charge, a thermite-based device designed to melt through the very grade of steel that shielded the panic room. He's coming for the logs, Sienna muttered, her focus shifting back to the code. Dante doesn't just want us dead, he wants the architect's encrypted files. Lucien, you've been holding a ledger of the architect's shipping routes for months, haven't you? That's why he's here, not just for me, for the data. Lucien stiffened. I thought it was a rival family's ledger, I didn't know it belonged to him. The architect doesn't lose things by accident, Sienna said. He let you steal it so he could find a reason to breach your security. He used you to test me to see if I had gone soft, and Dante was his inside man from the start. On the screen, Dante leaned into the camera again, his expression shifting from boredom to a twisted, resentful sneer. Do you hear her, Lucien? Still calculating, still the perfect machine. She doesn't love you. She chose you because you were the most powerful shield she could find. You were a hiding spot, nothing more. Shut him up, Lucien growled. I'm doing better than that, Sienna replied. She slammed her palm onto the enter key. Outside in the hallway, a series of hidden panels hissed open. These weren't part of Lucien's original security design. Sienna had spent the last 2 years quietly installing her own insurance policies during the penthouse renovations. A thick, pressurized cloud of halon gas erupted into the corridor, not as a fire suppressant, but as a blinding, suffocating wall. Dante stumbled back, coughing violently, as the mercenaries scrambled for their oxygen masks. Lucien, listen to me, Sienna said, grabbing his lapels and pulling him close. The scent of jasmine was entirely gone now, replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of ozone and blood. The thermite charge will be live in 2 minutes. When that door melts, they will expect us to be cowering in the corner. We won't be. She reached behind the primary server rack and pulled out a heavy, long-barreled shotgun and a bandolier of shells. She tossed them to Lucien. Dante is the key, she continued. The architect is watching through Dante's tactical feed. If we break Dante, we break the architect's eyes. I need you to hold the door. Can you do that? Can you trust the monster enough to let me hunt? Lucien looked at the shotgun, then at the woman who had lied to him every day for 1,000 days. He saw the way she held herself, the lethal symmetry of her stance, the way the torn red dress looked less like a garment and more like a battle standard. He realized then that he didn't just love the wife, he was captivated by the predator. Kill him, Lucien said, his voice dropping into a register of pure, cold command. Kill them all. I'll settle the bill for the lies when the floor stops bleeding. Sienna nodded once, a sharp, professional acknowledgement. The door began to glow. A thin, white-hot line appeared at the top of the steel frame, sparks showering down like a waterfall of stars. The heat in the room spiked instantly. Sienna moved to the side of the door, merging with the shadows of the equipment racks. She checked her sidearm one last time. 30 seconds, she whispered. The line of fire completed its circuit around the door. With a deafening asterisk thud, the massive slab of steel fell inward, slamming onto the floor and sending a wave of heat through the room. Smoke poured in, and through the haze, the first two mercenaries stepped over the fallen door, their weapons raised. Boom! Lucien's shotgun roared, the blast catching the first man in the chest and throwing him back into the hallway. Sienna didn't wait for the second man to fire. She launched herself from the shadows, her bare feet silent on the hot steel of the fallen door. She dived low, sliding under the second mercenary's line of sight, and drove her knife into the back of his knee. As he buckled, she used his shoulder as a mounting block, vaulting over him and into the hallway. She was out. The hallway was a nightmare of smoke and flickering emergency lights. She saw Dante retreating toward the balcony, flanked by two more guards. Dante, she screamed, her voice a clarion call of rage. The traitor turned, his face pale in the strobe-like lights. He raised his pistol, but Sienna was already moving, a crimson blur in the darkness. She wasn't running away anymore. She was coming home to the violence she was born for. The balcony doors had been blown outward, allowing the frigid night air to collide with the sweltering, smoke-filled hallway. The curtains whipped like ghostly wings, and for a moment the only sound was the distant wail of sirens far below. Sienna stood at the threshold of the living room, her silhouette framed by the flickering orange glow of a small fire in the library. Dante was backed against the glass railing of the terrace, 42 stories above the pavement. His guards were dead or incapacitated, leaving him alone with the woman he had tried to sell back to her maker. "You look beautiful, Sienna," a voice vibrated, not from the intercom this time, but from the high-end surround sound speakers that spanned the entire penthouse. "The carnage suits you. It always did." Sienna didn't look at the speakers. Her eyes were locked on Dante's trembling hands. "Show yourself, architect. Stop hiding behind the glass and the wires." "I am everywhere in this room, my dear," the voice replied, smooth as aged whiskey. "I am in the code that locked your doors. I am in the silk that touches your skin. And I am in the heartbeat of the man standing behind you." Lucien emerged from the smoke of the panic room, the shotgun resting heavy in his grip. His face was a mask of soot and cold fury. He didn't look at Dante. He looked at the ceiling, as if he could stare through the plaster to find the man pulling the strings. "You've caused a lot of damage to my home," Lucien growled. "Home," the architect chuckled. "A lion doesn't have a home, Lucien, it has a territory, and you were merely the caretaker of mine. Did you really think a girl like Sienna, Project 096, could simply retire? I gave her to you to see if the domestic life would dull her edges. I wanted to see if love was a stronger motivator than fear." "And," Sienna spat, her voice trembling with suppressed adrenaline. "And you've disappointed me, Sienna. You didn't kill Lucien when he first discovered the dress. You didn't protect the ledger. You tried to save them both. You've become sentimental. A weapon with a heart is just a jagged piece of metal waiting to break." Dante, sensing a shift in the architect's attention, lunged for a fallen weapon. Before he could even touch the metal, Sienna fired a single round. The bullet barked from her handgun, shattering Dante's kneecap. He collapsed with a sickening scream, clutching his leg as he rolled toward the edge of the terrace. "Quiet, Dante," the architect said dismissively, as if silencing a barking dog. "The adults are talking." "Why the ledger?" Lucien demanded, stepping forward. "If you wanted her back, you could have sent a team a year ago." "The ledger was the test for you, Lucien," the architect revealed. "I needed to know if you were worthy of her, if you would protect the secret of her blood as fiercely as your own empire. You failed. You let her play house. You let her hide the very things that make her magnificent. You tried to turn a hurricane into a summer breeze." A wall-sized monitor in the living room flickered to life. It didn't show the security feed. It showed a grainy black-and-white video from 15 years ago. A young girl, no older than 12, stood in a white room. She was surrounded by 4 grown men armed with batons. In less than 60 seconds, the girl was the only one standing. Lucien watched the screen, his stomach churning. The girl had Sienna's eyes, the same haunting, dark depth, but they were void of any light. "That is what you married, Lucien." The architect's voice was almost a whisper now, intimate and cruel. "She didn't run away from me. She was the one who burned the facility down. She was my masterpiece because she was the only one with the will to destroy her creator. And now she's going to do it again, or she's going to watch you die. Suddenly, the red emergency lights stopped flickering and turned a steady, pulsing crimson. A countdown appeared on every screen in the penthouse. *0300. The thermite charge in the panic room was only the beginning, the architect said. I've rigged the structural supports. In 3 minutes this penthouse becomes a tomb. There is one parachute in the closet of the master suite. Only one. Sienna's breath hitched. She looked at Lucien, the man who had given her a name, a home, and a life where she didn't have to kill to survive. One of you leaves, one of you stays, the architect finished. A final lesson in sacrifice. Choose quickly, 096. The clock is ticking and I'm eager to see which version of you wins, the wife or the ghost. The speakers cut out with a sharp pop. The only sound left was Dante's whimpering and the rhythmic thump-thump of the countdown. Lucien looked at the screen, then at Sienna. He saw the tears welling in her eyes, the first sign of the innocent wife he had seen since the night began. Sienna, Lucien said, his voice surprisingly soft. Don't, she whispered, don't say it. Go to the suite, he commanded, stepping toward her. Take the parachute, get out of the city. I'm not leaving you, Lucien, we can find another way. There is no other way with him, Lucien roared, gesturing to the screens. He built you to be a survivor, so survive. Prove to him that he can't kill the part of you that I love. Sienna looked at the clock. 02:14. She looked at Dante, who was trying to crawl toward the door. Then she looked at the shattered remains of her life. A cold, familiar clarity washed over her. The architect thought he knew her. He thought he had narrowed her choices down to 2. He was wrong. Lucien, Sienna said, her voice regaining that terrifying, lethal steadiness. He's not in the wires, he's not in the screens. If he's watching us this closely, he's in the building. He's in the penthouse directly below us. She grabbed Lucien's hand, her grip crushing. We aren't going to the closet, we're going down. The countdown glowed a toxic scarlet against the smoke. 01:45 *. Sienna didn't head for the master suite. Instead, she knelt in the center of the wreckage, her fingers clawing at the edge of the Italian marble where the thermite had weakened the structural seams. Lucien, the shotgun, the floor joists near the service duct. Lucien understood instantly. He didn't question her, he didn't have time. He leveled the weapon at the floor and emptied the remaining shells into the scorched stone. The marble shattered, revealing the honeycomb steel and ventilation shafts that fed the floor below. The architect is a voyeur, Sienna hissed, tearing a long strip of crimson silk from her dress and wrapping it around her palm to protect it from the heat. He wouldn't risk a remote feed cutting out during his grand finale. He's in the sub-penthouse. He's watching the heat signatures from right beneath our feet. She didn't wait for a ladder. She lowered herself into the jagged hole, her torn red dress snagging on the twisted rebar. She looked like a fallen angel descending into the depths of a burning heaven. Lucien followed, dropping into the dark, cramped crawl space. They emerged into a mirror image of their own home, but this floor was cold, dark, and filled with the hum of high-end servers. In the center of the room, illuminated by the glow of a dozen monitors, sat a man in a white linen suit. He was leaning back in a leather chair, a glass of vintage wine in one hand, watching the countdown on the floor above. The architect didn't turn around. You were always the overachiever, 096. You found the blind spot. Sienna stepped into the light. She was a vision of carnage, barefoot, blood-streaked, her red dress reduced to a tattered shroud. She looked more powerful than she ever had in her diamonds. The game is over, father. The architect stood, turning slowly. He was older than the videos, his face a map of refined cruelty. He looked at Lucien with mild interest, then back at Sienna. Over? No, you've just moved the climax to a more intimate setting. But look at the clock, child. 00:40. If I die, the sequence accelerates, the architect smiled. We all go down together, a family portrait in ash. I'm not a wife and I'm not a ghost, Sienna said, stepping toward him, her handgun leveled at his heart. I am the woman who learned how to survive *you. She didn't pull the trigger. Instead, she lunged, using the weight of her body to tackle him into the server racks. As they crashed into the electronics, Lucien moved to the master console. The override code, Lucien shouted, his fingers hovering over the keypad. Sienna, I need the sequence. Belgrade, she screamed while pinning the architect's throat against the metal. The date of the fire, 5/12. Lucien punched in the numbers. The red lights in the room turned a calm, steady blue. The countdown froze at **0004**. The architect gasped for air, a thin trail of blood trickling from his lip. He looked up at Sienna, a twisted sense of pride in his eyes. "There she is, my Red Queen." Sienna leaned in close, her voice a lethal whisper. "The Queen doesn't need a maker." With a sharp, sickening snap, she ended the legacy of the man who had built her. She stood up, the silence of the room absolute, and looked at Lucien. The penthouse above was a ruin, and the woman he knew was gone, but in the wreckage something new, something honest, had been born. The silence that followed the architect's death was more deafening than the gunfire. In the blue-tinted light of the server room, the air felt heavy, stripped of the manic energy that had fueled the night. Sienna stood over the body of her creator, her chest rising and falling in jagged heaves. The red dress, once a symbol of a curated, captive life, was now a shredded battle flag, stained with the dust of the penthouse and the blood of her enemies. Lucien stepped away from the console, his movements stiff. He looked at the man on the floor, then at the woman standing before him. For 3 years he had been the protector, the Don, the man who held the keys to the city. But in the cold light of the aftermath, he realized he was standing in the presence of something far more ancient and absolute than a mere mafia title. He was standing in the presence of the woman who had truly built his world, not through the gentle grace of a wife, but through the silent, lethal craftsmanship of a ghost. The diamonds around her neck caught the flickering emergency lights, throwing sharp, cold sparks against the crimson ruin of her gown. She looked like a goddess of war, her dark hair matted with rain and sweat, her skin pale against the darkening stains on the silk. Lucien felt a strange, hollow ache in his chest, the sound of his own assumptions crumbling. He had loved a shadow, a carefully constructed illusion of peace, while the real woman had lived in the trenches of his own wars, protecting him from the very demons she had helped create. "Sienna," he breathed, the name feeling different on his tongue, less like a prayer and more like an oath. She finally turned her gaze to him. The icy, mechanical focus of the operative began to recede, leaving behind a raw, agonizing vulnerability. Her eyes were wide, searched for the rejection she was certain would follow. She expected him to look at her with the same horror he had shown the dress. She expected the distance to become an abyss. "I didn't want you to know," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time that night. "I wanted to be the woman you thought I was. I wanted that life more than I wanted to breathe." Lucien didn't speak. He crossed the small, cramped space of the server room in 2 strides. He didn't recoil from the blood on her hands or the coldness in her touch. He reached out, his large, scarred hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of soot. "You think I love you for the silence, Sienna?" he asked, his voice a low, vibrating growl of conviction. "I loved you because I felt the fire in you, even when you tried to douse it. I didn't marry a trophy, I married a partner." He pulled her into him, a fierce, desperate embrace that seemed to anchor them both to the earth. Sienna let out a broken sob, her forehead resting against his shoulder, the weight of 1,000 secrets finally lifting. Outside, the city sirens were a distant, inconsequential hum. The empire would need to be rebuilt, the traitors dealt with and the shadows cleared, but the foundation was finally real. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his expression hardening with a new kind of resolve. "The architect is dead," Lucien said, "but he was right about one thing. You are a masterpiece, but you don't belong to him, and you don't belong to me." He took her hand, his fingers interlocking with hers, their blood mingling in the creases of their palms. "You belong to the throne," he said, "and tonight we take it together." Sienna looked at the wreckage of the room, then back at the man who had seen her darkness and refused to blink. She straightened her posture, the little bird dead and buried, replaced by the Red Queen. She gripped his hand back, her strength matching his. "Then let's finish it," she said. Together, they walked out of the server room and into the dawn, leaving the blood and diamonds behind, ready to rule a city that had no idea the real power had finally arrived.